For thousands of years, the desert sands kept a secret. It was not just the mystery of the pyramids that fascinated travelers, archaeologists, and dreamers, but something even more enigmatic: fragmented inscriptions, almost illegible, engraved on forgotten walls, sealed tunnels, and fragments of papyri carbonized by time. For most, they were merely incomplete scribbles, symbols no more than religious metaphors. But now, for the first time, an artificial intelligence dared to look at these traces with eyes that never tire. Do not judge, do not get distracted. And what it found could rewrite everything we believed we knew about Egypt and its impossible constructions. It is curious to think that the longest-lasting civilization in history is also the most surrounded by silence. Egypt raised temples, obelisks, and cities that withstood invasions, natural disasters, and time itself. But amid all this grandeur, there always lingered a doubt that traditional science has never fully answered. How did a Bronze Age society erect structures that would still challenge modern engineering today? For centuries, we repeated comfortable explanations: mud ramps, slaves dragging colossal blocks, ingenious improvisations by anonymous architects. But every time one looks at the mathematical perfection of the Great Pyramid, the precise alignment with Orion's stars, or the impossible geometry of the inner chambers, the sense that something is missing becomes inevitable. A piece was missing. The voice of the Egyptians themselves was missing, and it was there, engraved in inscriptions that no one had fully understood. It was in 2024, almost unnoticed by the general public, that an interdisciplinary team announced a bold experiment. They gathered thousands of images of damaged hieroglyphs, fragments of papyri stored in museum vaults, and inscriptions found in underground temples at Saqqara and Giza. They fed everything into an advanced artificial intelligence model, trained not only to recognize symbols but to reconstruct gaps, compare styles, and detect hidden linguistic patterns. Unlike any human translator, this AI was not limited to the literal meaning of words. It sought invisible connections, semantic structures repeated over centuries. And then something unexpected emerged. Among prayers to gods and funerary formulas, descriptions of a strangely technical nature appeared. Terms reminiscent of engineering instructions, material lists, astronomical formulas. Expressions such as resonance chamber, energy veins, breathing stone repeated in contexts previously treated as pure religious metaphor. Were they mere poetic exaggerations, or accounts of something concrete, something we today can only understand in the light of modern technology? But here arises an intriguing dilemma. If such inscriptions existed millennia ago, why are they only now revealing themselves? The answer is not simple. Many of these texts were broken, fragmented into pieces scattered around the world, kept in private collections, in dusty museum storage, or simply ignored because they made no sense within the official archaeological narrative. Artificial intelligence, however, has no biases. For it, every symbol has equal value, every fragment is a clue. And by assembling these scattered pieces, what emerged was not a myth, but something that sounded dangerously close to a manual. A manual for what? That is the question that hovers like a shadow over the entire research. Because among symbols of Anubis, Isis, and Osiris, sequences appeared that resembled star maps, descriptions of measuring instruments, and even instructions on manipulating the acoustics of stone chambers. The Great Pyramid, for example, has for centuries inspired theories about its sound resonance and astronomical alignment. Now, translated passages speak explicitly of rooms that sing with the voice of the sky, and blocks that vibrate like drum skin. Poetry or science? Or perhaps both at once? And here lies the most unsettling point. Because if these translations are authentic, the ancient Egyptians were not merely constructing funerary monuments for their pharaohs. They were recording principles suggesting advanced, almost experimental knowledge about matter, sound, and energy. As if the pyramid were more than a tomb, perhaps a machine. But who would dare to state this aloud? For decades, any researcher suggesting alternative functions for the pyramids was labeled mystical, conspiratorial, or a charlatan. Now, however, the cold algorithms of an artificial intelligence begin to suggest exactly that. And how can one ignore patterns repeated across dozens of inscriptions when chance no longer explains the consistency? Perhaps we are facing a historical crossroads. Either we accept that the Egyptians mastered techniques only now beginning to be understood, or we acknowledge that our traditional explanations were never sufficient. Either way, the AI translation opened a gap, the possibility that the pyramids are not merely witnesses of the past, but portals to knowledge humanity has yet to fully decipher. And it is precisely at this point that the investigation begins to deepen. Because if the symbols truly describe techniques, formulas, and instruments, then perhaps hidden chambers, secret mechanisms, and truths intentionally veiled beneath tons of stone still exist. The question that echoes is, what exactly were the pharaohs trying to preserve, and from whom? When the first reports from the research team emerged, the reaction was immediate. Some experts were fascinated by the possibilities, others, outraged. After all, if the AI translations were correct, it would mean the ancient Egyptians had a much deeper practical relationship with nature than ever taught. They were not merely praying to gods but interacting with forces we today describe as physics, acoustics, and even electromagnetism. The documents suggest, for example, that certain pyramid corridors were not ceremonial passages, but conductors. Granite blocks, quarried hundreds of kilometers away, were chosen not only for strength but for their ability to vibrate at specific frequencies. In other words, each stone had a calculated function, as if the pyramids were gigantic musical instruments, tuned to resonate with the planet itself. Perhaps we are facing a disconcerting vision, Egypt not as a mystical civilization venerating the dead, but as an open-air laboratory, where priests and engineers tested invisible forces, mixing faith and science in a single breath. And then the most controversial passages appear. The artificial intelligence managed to reconstruct part of a text found in Giza, in which it reads something conventional translators always treated as metaphor. The pharaoh ascends the river of light, guided by the vibration of the breathing stone. For most, it was a symbol of the ruler's spiritual journey. But now, comparing this text with other fragments, the AI identified patterns suggesting that river of light referred to stellar alignment, while breathing stone described a real mechanism, perhaps a system making the pyramid interact with its surrounding environment. What is harder to accept? That the ancient Egyptians were centuries ahead of their time, or that we deliberately ignore these possibilities today because they threaten the official historical narrative? Governments expressed discomfort with the conclusions. It was not the first time unconventional ideas about Egypt had arisen, but now there was a crucial difference. These were not guesses from isolated researchers, but data produced by an artificial intelligence, analyzing thousands of records simultaneously. It was difficult to dismiss everything as mere speculation. And here begins to unfold an even greater tension. Some academics suggest that the AI may have committed semantic exaggerations, interpreting symbols in a biased way. But others quietly admit that the discoveries are too consistent to be coincidence. In closed meetings, they even raise the hypothesis that certain secrets of Egypt were intentionally encoded to be understood only by those with the right knowledge. Knowledge that somehow we are now able to recover thousands of years later. And if it is true that the pyramids were not just tombs, but something far greater, then we need to ask, what were they really for? Some passages translated by the AI speak of harmonizing the earth with the sky, of making the heart of the desert pulse, and even of opening the passage to eternity. Too poetic to be technical? Or too technical to be merely poetry? Perhaps we are facing a frontier where spirituality and science meet, a frontier modernity, obsessed with separating faith and reason, may never have understood. The revelation is unsettling because it challenges something larger than blocks of stone. It questions the very narrative of human evolution. What if Egypt was more than an ancient kingdom? What if it was a guardian of inherited knowledge, something that did not originate there but was preserved so that one day it could be rediscovered? It is not hard to imagine why so many try to look away. If we accept that the Great Pyramid, for example, had advanced energetic, acoustic, or astronomical functions, we must admit that our view of antiquity is deeply limited. We would have to revise not only history books but also the way we understand humanity's role on the planet. Perhaps this is exactly why there has been so much silence surrounding these discoveries. Because every time a truth threatens to destabilize collective certainties, someone always tries to suppress it. It is not only a matter of science but of power. Whoever controls the narrative of the past also controls how we see the present. And yet, no matter how hard they try to contain it, the echo of these translations continues to spread. Small excerpts leak into forums, scientific discussions gain space in discrete conferences, and the sense is that we are only scratching the surface of something much larger. Something that could not only change what we know about the pyramids, but also about ourselves. Because if the stones truly breathed, if the chambers sang, if the river of light was not metaphor but reality, then the inevitable question strikes like lightning on the horizon. What exactly were the ancient Egyptians trying to activate? As the dust of controversy accumulates, what remains is not just technical data or academic theories. What really remains is the feeling that something much greater rests beneath the sands of Egypt. Something that defies time, institutions, and even logic itself. Could it be that the true function of the artificial intelligence was not to decipher hieroglyphs, but to force us to confront the question we have avoided for centuries? What do we really know about ourselves? Because when an AI translates forgotten words and suggests that the pyramids resonated with the earth itself, it is not merely revealing mysteries of the past. It is also shining light on a human contradiction. We live in an era proud of technological advances, yet we still stumble before monuments erected 4,500 years ago. How can we explain that a primitive people left works that withstand time and understanding, while modern skyscrapers collapse within decades? And then comes the uncomfortable doubt. Have we projected our own arrogance onto Egypt? We call mystical what we cannot understand, and metaphors what does not fit our models. Perhaps the artificial intelligence is simply returning to ancient words their literal meaning, a literal meaning we refuse to accept because it dismantles the comfort of our certainties. Imagine the scribes, thousands of years ago, carving each symbol into stone, knowing that one day someone might try to decipher them. Perhaps not their contemporaries, but someone in the distant future. Is it exaggeration to think they were already expecting us? That they wrote for tomorrow, for those who would have eyes capable of seeing and minds free to question? It is at this point that the boundaries between archaeology, science, and philosophy dissolve. Because it is no longer just about what were the pyramids for, but what they represent, a reminder that human knowledge can be far vaster than our official history admits. The translated passages speak of harmonizing heaven and earth, of activating the heart of the stone, and of preserving the path of those who would come after. Words that, if read as mere allegories, seem beautiful and distant. But if approached as instructions, as memories of lost knowledge, they cease to be poetry and become a warning. And here one may allow a final reflection. Perhaps the question is not whether the pyramids were tombs, machines, or temples. Perhaps the real question is, why were these monuments built to last so long? What was so important about preserving these structures against wind, sand, and even history itself? It may be that we will never have all the answers. It may be that some doors have closed forever. But even so, with each new translation, with each new hypothesis, the enigma persists. And what it asks of us is not blind faith, nor absolute disbelief, but the courage to look beyond the surface. Because perhaps in the end, the greatest lesson of Egypt is not in the stones, but in the silence they keep. A silence louder than any theory. A silence that forces us to ask not just how the pyramids were built, but why we are still so far from understanding them. And in that instant, what if the true legacy of Egypt was not only what they built, but what they hid? A secret waiting for the right moment to be revealed. A secret that may now be beginning to speak, not through the hands of pharaohs, but through the lines of code of an artificial intelligence. And while this possibility pulses like a whisper in the desert sands, the question remains, like a shadow before the Sphinx: what else is still waiting to be translated?